The Galactic Council. In the grand amphitheater of the Galactic Council headquarters, the assembled delegates of 100 alien races murmured amongst themselves, their voices echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Seated in concentric circles that rose up from the central dais, each delegation occupied a section delineated by shimmering force fields and marked with the sigil of their people. At the outermost edge, in a cramped box afforded to the Council's newest and least influential member, sat the human delegation. Ambassador Zara Solano shifted in her form-fitting pressure suit, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon her. Though humanity had finally clawed its way to a seat at the galactic table, it was clear they were far from welcome. "Pay them no heed," murmured her aide, a wiry man named Kai. "They fear us because they don't understand us." Zara nodded, her gaze fixed on the central dais where the Arxian Chancellor, resplendent in his amber exo-robe, was calling the session to order. The Arxians were one of the Council's oldest and most powerful members, their influence rivaled only by the ethereal Keen and the militant Zotharians. As the Chancellor droned on about minor trade disputes and territorial claims, Zara's thoughts drifted to the circumstances that had brought humanity to this point. It had been less than a century since the first faster-than-light drive had carried a human ship beyond the boundaries of their solar system. In the decades that followed, they had made contact with a dizzying array of alien civilizations, each with its own culture, technology, and agenda. Some had welcomed humanity as a new variable in the galactic equation, a potential ally or trading partner. Others had seen them as a threat, a chaotic element that upset the delicate balance of power. The Galactic Council, which had long served as a forum for interspecies diplomacy and conflict resolution, had been forced to grapple with the question of humanity's place in the cosmos. After years of lobbying and negotiation, humanity had finally been granted a provisional seat on the Council, but it was clear that many of the other delegates viewed them with suspicion and contempt. The Arxians in particular seemed to regard humanity as little more than upstart primates, scarcely evolved enough to grasp the intricacies of galactic politics. As if sensing her thoughts, the Chancellor fixed Zara with a cold stare. "And now," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "we turn to the matter of the human delegation's request for expanded trading rights. Ambassador Solano, you may state your case." Zara rose to her feet, feeling the eyes of the entire Council upon her. She knew that this was a critical moment, a chance to prove that humanity deserved a place among the stars. She took a deep breath, preparing to launch into the carefully crafted argument she had rehearsed a dozen times. But before she could utter a word, a deafening boom echoed through the amphitheater. The force fields separating the delegations flickered and died, and the central dais was suddenly enveloped in a blinding flash of light. Zara threw up her hands to shield her eyes, barely registering Kai's shout of alarm. When the glare faded, the amphitheater was in chaos. The Arxian Chancellor lay sprawled on the dais, his exo-robe smoking and tattered. All around the room, delegates were shouting and gesticulating, some rushing to aid the fallen Chancellor, while others activated personal force fields and drew weapons. "What happened?" Zara demanded, her heart pounding in her chest. "What was that?" Kai shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know," he said, "but whatever it was, it's not good." As the chaos continued to unfold around them, Zara felt a sinking sensation in the pit of her stomach. She had come to the Galactic Council hoping to secure humanity's place in the cosmos, but now it seemed that the cosmos itself was unraveling before her eyes. The fragile peace that had held the galaxy together for centuries was suddenly as tenuous as a thread, and humanity was caught in the middle, with no idea of what horrors might come next. An unprecedented attack. In the aftermath of the explosion, the Galactic Council headquarters devolved into a scene of utter pandemonium. Emergency medical teams rushed to treat the injured while security personnel attempted to restore order, their shouts barely audible over the clamor of panicked delegates. Zara and Kai picked their way through the chaos, their eyes scanning the room for any sign of further danger. As they approached the central dais, They saw the Archean Chancellor being loaded onto a floating stretcher, his body limp and unresponsive. "Ambassador Solano," a voice called out, and Zara turned to see a tall, slender figure emerge from the crowd. It was Nixis, the kind delegate, her iridescent skin shimmering with agitation. "Nixis," Zara said, relief washing over her at the sight of a familiar face. "What's going on? Who could have done this?" The kind shook her head, her large, almond-shaped eyes filled with worry. "I don't know," she said, "but it's not just here. We're receiving reports of attacks on Archean, Kine, and Zotharian colonies across the galaxy. It's coordinated, simultaneous, like nothing we've ever seen before." Zara felt a chill run down her spine. An attack on the Galactic Council itself was brazen enough, but strikes against multiple species at once. It was unthinkable. As if on cue, a holographic display flickered to life above the central dais, revealing the grim visage of the Zotharian Prime Marshal. "This is an act of war," he bellowed, his voice booming through the amphitheater. "The Zotharian Confederation will not stand for this unprovoked aggression. We demand immediate retribution." Shouts of assent rose from the Zotharian delegation, their fists pounding the air. Across the room, the Archeans were also in an uproar, their normally stoic demeanor cracking under the weight of fury and grief. "We must respond with strength," the Archean Vice-Chancellor declared, his voice trembling with rage. "The perpetrators of this heinous attack must be found and brought to justice." As the cries for vengeance grew louder, Zara felt a growing sense of unease. She had seen firsthand the devastating power of the Archean and Zotharian militaries, and the thought of that might being unleashed in a fit of blind retaliation was terrifying. "Wait," she shouted, her voice cutting through the din. "We don't even know who's responsible yet. We need to investigate, gather intelligence, not rush to war." The Prime Marshal rounded on her, his eyes narrowing. "And what would you suggest, human?" he sneered. "That we sit back and do nothing while our people are slaughtered?" Zara met his gaze unflinchingly. "No," she said. "I suggest we use all the resources at our disposal to find out who did this and why. Rushing into a conflict without knowing the full picture will only lead to more chaos and destruction." For a moment, the amphitheater was silent, the weight of Zara's words hanging in the air. Then, slowly, a murmur of assent began to build. The kind delegation, long known for their commitment to diplomacy and reason, nodded in agreement, and even some of the Archeans and Zotharians seemed to be considering her point. But it was Nixis who spoke next, her voice soft yet commanding. "The human is right," she said. "We cannot let our emotions cloud our judgment. We must proceed with caution and wisdom, lest we play right into the hands of those who seek to divide us." The Prime Marshal looked as if he might argue, but a warning glance from the Archean Vice-Chancellor silenced him. "Very well," the Vice-Chancellor said, his voice still thick with grief. "We will convene an emergency session of the Council to discuss our next steps. But mark my words, Ambassador Solano, if we find that humanity had any hand in this atrocity, there will be consequences." With that, he turned and stalked away, his entourage trailing behind him. Zara let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, her heart pounding in her chest. "That was a bold move," Kai murmured, his eyes wide with admiration. "You may have just prevented a galactic war." Zara shook her head. "Not yet," she said. "We still have to find out who's behind these attacks and why. And something tells me that's not going to be easy." As the delegates began to disperse, each returning to their own quarters to regroup and strategize, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The galaxy stood on the brink of a precipice, and it would take all of humanity's ingenuity and determination to keep it from plunging into the abyss. The human delegation. In the hours following the attack, the Galactic Council headquarters was a hive of activity. Delegates from every species huddled in tense, whispered conversations, trading rumors and speculation about who could be behind the unprecedented assault. Amidst the chaos, Zara and Kai made their way to the human delegation's quarters, a Spartan suite of rooms tucked away in a far corner of the sprawling complex. As they entered, they were greeted by the worried faces of their fellow delegates. "What's the latest?" asked Lena Sorensen, a tall, lean woman with close-cropped blonde hair who served as the delegation's chief of security. Zara shook her head. "Not good," she said. "The Arctians and Zotharians are out for blood. They're ready to launch a full-scale war against whoever they think is responsible. Which could be just about anyone at this point," Kai added grimly. "The attacks were too coordinated, too precise. Whoever did this had inside knowledge of each species' defenses and vulnerabilities." Lena frowned. "You think it was an inside job?" "It's possible," Zara said. "But we can't rule out an external threat either. There are plenty of factions in the galaxy that would love to see the Council tear itself apart." As they spoke, a holographic display in the center of the room flickered to life, revealing the face of Admiral Nyla Singh, the commanding officer of the human fleet in the Galactic sector. "Ambassador Solano," she said, her voice tinged with urgency. "I just received word from Earth. The President has authorized me to offer the Council our full support in investigating these attacks." Zara nodded, a flicker of hope kindling in her chest. "Thank you, Admiral," she said. "We're going to need all the help we can get." The Admiral's expression remained grave. "There's more," she said. "I've been authorized to assemble a special task force to aid in the investigation. A team of our best and brightest, each with unique skills and expertise." Zara raised an eyebrow. "A human team?" she asked. "Working with the Council races?" "Precisely," the Admiral said. "We believe that a joint effort, combining our strengths and perspectives, offers the best chance of uncovering the truth behind these attacks and preventing further escalation." Zara considered this for a moment. It was a risky move, inserting a human team into the heart of the investigation. If anything went wrong, it could easily be seen as a power grab, an attempt by humanity to assert dominance over the other species. But at the same time, she knew that the Admiral was right. The Council races, for all their advanced technology and ancient wisdom, were too mired in their own rivalries and prejudices to work together effectively. If anyone could cut through the noise and get to the truth, it was a team of humans, unbound by the galaxy's tangled web of alliances and animosities. "All right," she said at last. "Let's do it. Assemble your team, Admiral. We'll present the idea to the Council at the emergency session." The Admiral nodded, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "I'll send you the dossiers of our candidates," she said. "I think you'll be impressed." As the hologram winked out, Zara turned to her fellow delegates, her expression resolute. "This is it," she said. "Our chance to prove to the galaxy what humanity is really made of. Not just another upstart species scrabbling for scraps, but a force for unity, for justice, for peace." Kai nodded, his eyes gleaming with determination. "We won't let you down, Ambassador," he said. Lena cracked her knuckles, a fierce grin spreading across her face. "Stand straight," she said. "Let's show these aliens what humans are really capable of." As they set to work, reviewing the dossiers of the Admiral's hand-picked team, Zara felt a surge of pride and purpose. For too long, humanity had been relegated to the sidelines of galactic affairs, watching as the great powers played their games of diplomacy and war. But now, with the galaxy on the brink of chaos, it was time for humanity to step up and take its rightful place among the stars. And Zara would be damned if she let anything stand in their way. Uncovering the truth. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was a tense and somber affair. Representatives from each species took turns delivering impassioned speeches, their words tinged with grief, anger, and fear. The Arctians and Zotharians continued to demand swift and merciless retaliation, while the Keen and other more pacifistic races urged caution and restraint. Through it all, Zara and her team sat in tense silence, waiting for their moment to speak. When at last the floor was opened for new business, she rose to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. Esteemed members of the council, she began, her voice echoing through the amphitheater. In this dark hour, we stand at a crossroads. The path of war and vengeance may seem tempting, but it is a path that leads only to more suffering and destruction. A murmur of dissent rippled through the Archean and Zotharian delegations, but Zara pressed on. Instead, I propose a different path, a path of unity, of cooperation, of shared purpose. The human delegation, with the blessing of our leaders back on Earth, has assembled a team of our best and brightest to aid in the investigation of these heinous attacks. She paused, letting her words sink in. This team, working in partnership with the council races, will use every resource at our disposal to uncover the truth behind these attacks and bring the perpetrators to justice, not through blind retaliation, but through careful investigation and due process. The amphitheater was silent for a long moment, the delegates weighing Zora's words. Then, slowly, a murmur of assent began to build. The kind delegation was the first to voice their support, followed by the Vostarians and the Illithids. Even some of the Archeans and Zotharians seemed to be coming around, their anger tempered by the prospect of a more measured response. Very well, the Archean vice-chancellor said at last, his voice heavy with resignation. The council will accept the human delegation's offer of assistance, but know this, Ambassador Solano. The Archean people will not rest until those responsible for this atrocity are brought to justice, by whatever means necessary. Zara nodded, her expression solemn. Nor will we, Vice-Chancellor, she said. Nor will we. With the council's blessing secured, Zara and her team wasted no time in getting to work. The investigative task force, dubbed Operation Unity, was quickly assembled, drawing on experts from across the spectrum of human endeavor. There was Dr. Marcus Vail, a brilliant xenobiologist with a deep understanding of alien physiology and psychology. Lena Sorensen, the delegation's chief of security, brought her years of experience in covert operations and tactical planning. Kai Nakamura, Zora's trusted aide, served as the team's expert in galactic politics and diplomacy. Rounding out the team were a pair of gifted engineers, Ava Patel and Rohan Singh, whose innovative designs and quick thinking had earned them a reputation as the best in the business. Together, they pored over the evidence from the attacks, sifting through reams of data and sensor readings, searching for any clue that might lead them to the culprits. It was painstaking work, made all the more difficult by the vastness of the galaxy and the complexity of the Council's Byzantine politics. But as the days stretched into weeks, a pattern began to emerge. A series of seemingly unrelated incidents, a stolen shipment of Archean weapons, a mysterious energy signature detected near a Zotharian outpost, a rash of sabotage and unrest on the fringes of Queen space, all pointing to a single, shadowy presence. The Phantoms, Dr. Vail whispered, his eyes wide with realization. It has to be. Zara frowned. She had heard whispers of the Phantoms before, a secretive cabal of renegades and extremists, drawn from the fringes of a dozen different species. They were said to be fanatics, obsessed with the idea of overthrowing the Council and plunging the galaxy into chaos. But until now, they had been little more than a ghost story, a bogeyman used to frighten unruly children. The idea that they could be behind something as audacious as the attacks on the Council was almost too much to believe. And yet, as the evidence mounted, it became harder and harder to deny. The Phantoms, it seemed, were all too real, and they were determined to bring the galaxy to its knees. For Zara and her team, the stakes had never been higher. They knew that they were racing against time, that every moment they delayed brought the galaxy closer to the brink of all-out war. But they also knew that they couldn't do it alone. They needed the support of the Council races, the wisdom of the Kine, the strength of the Archeans, the cunning of the Zotharians. Only by working together, by putting aside their differences and uniting against a common threat, could they hope to stop the Phantoms and save the galaxy from destruction. It was a daunting task, one that would test the limits of their skill, their courage, and their resolve. But as Zara looked around at her team, at the determination etched on their faces, she knew that they were ready for the challenge. "All right," she said, her voice steady with resolve. "Let's get to work. We have a galaxy to save." The turning point. With the identity of the attackers revealed, Operation Unity sprang into action. Working in close coordination with the Council races, they launched a series of lightning raids on suspected Phantom strongholds and supply caches, seizing weapons, technology, and vital intelligence. But even as they struck blow after blow against the Phantoms, Zara and her team knew that they were still racing against time. The Phantoms were a cunning and elusive foe, always seeming to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. It was Avapatul who finally made the breakthrough. Poring over a trove of data seized in a raid on a Phantom safe house, she noticed a curious pattern in the energy signatures of their ships and weapons. "It's almost like they're using a single power source," she said, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Something we've never seen before." Dr. Vale leaned in, his eyes widening as he studied the data. "Of course," he breathed. "Neutronium." Zara frowned. "Neutronium? Isn't that theoretical?" "It was," Dr. Vale said. "Until now. Somehow, the Phantoms have found a way to stabilize it, to harness its incredible energy density. With a power source like that, they could run their ships and weapons indefinitely, without ever needing to refuel or resupply." Rohan Singh let out a low whistle. "That's a game changer," he said. "No wonder they've been able to strike with such impunity." Zara nodded, her mind racing. "If we could find their neutronium source," she said slowly, "cut off their supply, we could cripple them." Kai finished, his eyes gleaming. "End this once and for all." With renewed determination, they threw themselves into the hunt, chasing down every lead and rumor, no matter how faint or seemingly insignificant. And at last, after weeks of tireless effort, they found what they were looking for. Deep in the heart of an uncharted nebula, hidden from prying eyes by a web of sensor-jamming technology, lay the Phantom's secret base. It was a sprawling complex of shipyards, weapons factories, and research labs, all powered by a single, pulsating core of pure neutronium. "This is it," Zara said, her voice tight with anticipation as they approached the base in a stolen Phantom ship. "We've got them." But even as they made their final approach, disaster struck. A sudden burst of energy from the base's defenses sent their ship tumbling out of control, alarms blaring and systems failing. "We're hit," Lena shouted, her fingers flying over the controls. "Shields down, weapons offline. We're dead in the water." Zara gritted her teeth, her mind racing. They had come too far to fail now, with the fate of the galaxy hanging in the balance. And in that moment, she knew what she had to do. "Kai," she said, her voice steady with resolve, "transmit the base's coordinates to the Council fleet. Tell them to commence the attack." Kai's eyes widened in shock. "But Ambassador," he said, "if they attack now, with us still on board—" "I know," Zara said softly, "but it's the only way. The neutronium core is too well defended, too deeply buried. The only way to destroy it is from the inside." For a long moment, the team was silent, each of them grappling with the enormity of what Zora was proposing. They had all known the risks when they signed up for this mission, had all been prepared to give their lives for the greater good. But to do so now, with victory so close at hand, was a bitter pill to swallow. At last, Lena spoke, her voice heavy with emotion. "It's been an honor serving with you, Ambassador," she said. "With all of you." Iva and Rohan nodded, their eyes glistening with unshed tears. Dr. Vale bowed his head, his lips moving in a silent prayer. Kai said nothing, his face a mask of grief and determination, as he bent over the communications console, his fingers flying over the keys. "Transmission sent," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's done." Zora closed her eyes, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over her. They had done their duty, had given everything they had to save the galaxy from destruction. And as the first salvo of council ships rained down upon the Phantom base, as the neutronium core began to shudder and crack under the onslaught, she knew that their sacrifice had not been in vain. In the end, Operation Unity had lived up to its name. Humans and aliens, working side by side in common cause, had achieved the impossible, and though the cost had been high, the galaxy would never forget what they had done. As the world around her dissolved in a blaze of light and fire, Zora's last thought was of Earth, of the shining blue marble that had given birth to her and her team, and to the indomitable spirit of humanity that had carried them to the stars. And then there was only silence and the endless void of space. A new era. Across the galaxy, the news of the Phantom's defeat spread like wildfire. Scenes of jubilation erupted on 100 worlds as the council races celebrated the end of the crisis that had brought them to the brink of war. But amidst the cheers and tears of joy, there was also a profound sense of loss. The sacrifice of Ambassador Solano and her team weighed heavy on the hearts of all who had known them, human and alien alike. On Earth, the news was greeted with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Zora and her team were hailed as heroes, their names etched into the annals of history alongside the greatest champions of humanity. But for those who had known them best, their families, their friends, their colleagues in the diplomatic corps, the pain of their loss was a raw and devastating wound. In the halls of the Galactic Council, a somber memorial service was held to honor the fallen heroes of Operation Unity. Representatives from every species spoke of their courage, their selflessness, their unwavering commitment to the cause of peace. But it was the Arxian Vice-Chancellor who perhaps put it best. "In the darkest hour of our history," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "when all seemed lost, Ambassador Solano and her team showed us the true meaning of unity. They reminded us that our strength lies not in our differences, but in our common bonds of compassion, of courage, of sacrifice. And though they are gone," he continued, "their legacy will endure. The galaxy will never forget what they did here, the price they paid for our survival. And we must honor that legacy by striving always to live up to their example, to build a future worthy of their sacrifice." In the weeks and months that followed, the galaxy began to heal. The Phantoms, their leadership shattered and their power base destroyed, quickly faded into obscurity, becoming little more than a dark footnote in the annals of galactic history. The council races, chastened by the crisis and inspired by the example of Operation Unity, put aside their old rivalries and grudges, forging a new era of cooperation and mutual understanding. And humanity, once seen as a brash and unpredictable upstart, now found itself welcomed as a full and equal partner in the galactic community. Human diplomats, scientists, engineers, and explorers were sought out and celebrated on 100 worlds, their unique perspective and indomitable spirit recognized as a vital contribution to the greater good. But perhaps the most profound change was the one that took place in the hearts and minds of the galaxy's inhabitants. The sacrifice of Operation Unity had shown them the true power of unity, of putting aside their differences and working together for a common cause. And as the galaxy looked to the future, to the challenges and opportunities that lay ahead, they did so with a newfound sense of hope and determination. For they knew that, whatever trials lay ahead, they would face them together, as one. Humans and aliens, united in common purpose, ready to brave the unknown and build a better tomorrow. It was a legacy that would endure long after the names of Zora Solano and her team had faded into legend. A legacy of courage, of sacrifice, of the unbreakable spirit of sentient life in all its wondrous diversity. And as the galaxy turned its eyes to the stars, to the endless expanse of possibility that lay before them, they knew that the future was theirs to shape together. The end.